The spreadsheet was mundane in appearance. Columns labeled source, date, subject, classification. Rows containing thousands of entries, each one representing an allegation, a claim, a piece of information that had been reported to law enforcement authorities. The spreadsheet had been compiled by the FBI's National Threat Operations Center in response to what amounted to a flood of reports alleging connections between Jeffrey Epstein and various high-profile political figures. One name appeared with extraordinary frequency: Donald Trump. When the 3 million pages of Epstein documents were released in February 2026, this spreadsheet was among them. And when journalists and analysts began examining the data, they discovered that Trump's name appeared 547 times in reports and allegations that had been submitted to the FBI by anonymous sources over a period of nearly 20 years. The volume was striking. The specificity of some allegations was striking, and the fact that Trump's name appeared with far greater frequency than any other political figure was striking. But here was the critical caveat that emerged from the Justice Department's official summary of the documents. Virtually all of these allegations were unsubstantiated. They had originated from anonymous tips, from social media rumors, from conspiracy theories circulating in fringe internet communities. The FBI had investigated very few of them. Those that had been investigated had yielded no credible evidence. And the Justice Department's official statement accompanying the document release explicitly noted that the allegations against Trump were baseless, sensational, and lacking in any evidentiary foundation. The palace's response to the revelation that Trump's name appeared frequently in Epstein-related allegations was notably careful. Palace advisors understood that any suggestion that the palace was involved in spreading unsubstantiated allegations against a former U.S. president could create serious diplomatic and political complications. A statement was issued noting simply that the palace had no involvement in the compilation or dissemination of the allegations, and that the palace did not intend to comment on allegations regarding any political figure. But the revelation created significant controversy nonetheless. Trump supporters immediately seized on the Justice Department's statement, noting that the allegations were unsubstantiated and baseless. They used this as evidence that the entire Epstein documents release had been politically motivated, designed to damage Trump and to benefit his political opponents. They argued that the frequency with which Trump's name appeared in unsubstantiated allegations demonstrated a coordinated effort to weaponize the Epstein scandal against him politically. On the other hand, critics of Trump argued that the very frequency with which his name appeared in allegations, even unsubstantiated ones, suggested a pattern of behavior that warranted serious scrutiny. They argued that Trump's long-standing association with Epstein, the documented evidence of their friendship dating back decades, and the numerous allegations that had circulated about Trump's conduct toward women all pointed to a troubling pattern that could not be dismissed simply by noting that the allegations in the FBI spreadsheet lacked evidentiary foundation. What made the situation particularly complex was that there was documentary evidence of Trump and Epstein's relationship. The documents showed that Trump and Epstein had been friends in the 1980s and 1990s. Photographs showed them together at various social events. They had apparently moved in similar circles in New York high society. They had both been members of exclusive clubs, and by all accounts they had been genuine acquaintances, not merely distant social connections. But Trump had apparently distanced himself from Epstein sometime in the 2000s. The documents showed no contact between them after approximately 2010. Trump had apparently learned about Epstein's legal troubles and had chosen to end the relationship. The Justice Department's summary of the documents noted this fact, suggesting that Trump's conduct in distancing himself from Epstein once Epstein's criminal history became public was not consistent with complicity in Epstein's activities. Yet this did not stop the speculation and the allegations. The unsubstantiated claims in the FBI spreadsheet suggested various nefarious activities, that Trump had attended Epstein's parties, that Trump had been involved in financial transactions with Epstein, that Trump had knowledge of Epstein's predatory behavior and had failed to report it. None of these claims had been verified. None of them had been supported by credible evidence, but they had circulated widely, had been repeated in media reports, and had contributed to a public narrative that Trump had been complicit in Epstein's network. Catherine, in her capacity as an institutional leader concerned with integrity and accountability, made a significant statement about the need to distinguish between documented evidence and unsubstantiated allegations. She noted that the palace's commitment to accountability did not extend to the dissemination or amplification of allegations that lacked evidentiary foundation. She argued that genuine institutional credibility required not just the willingness to acknowledge institutional failures, but the willingness to do so based on documented evidence rather than on speculation or rumor. This statement was understood by observers as an implicit criticism of media outlets and of various political figures who had used the Epstein documents as a basis for making broad allegations against Trump without distinguishing between documented facts and unsubstantiated claims. Catherine's statement suggested that the palace understood the importance of maintaining rigorous standards for what constituted credible evidence of wrongdoing. But the revelation of the spreadsheet and the frequency with which Trump's name appeared in unsubstantiated allegations did raise legitimate questions about what had prompted such a volume of allegations. Had Trump engaged in behavior that, while not rising to the level of criminal conduct, had still been sufficiently inappropriate that it had generated concern among people who had knowledge of his activities? Or had Trump simply become a target of politically motivated conspiracy theories and baseless allegations? The documents provided some insight into the sources of the allegations. Some had come from people who claimed to have direct knowledge of Trump's conduct. Others had come from people who had read about allegations online and were simply repeating them to law enforcement. Still others appeared to have originated in conspiracy theory communities that had no basis in any factual information. One particularly striking example involved an allegation that Trump had made a substantial donation to Epstein in the 1990s, with the allegation implying that the donation was designed to ensure Epstein's silence about some unspecified wrongdoing on Trump's part. The allegation had been reported to the FBI by an anonymous source who claimed to have inside knowledge of Trump's financial activities. But the investigation of this allegation had revealed nothing. No such donation had occurred. No financial relationship of the kind alleged had existed. The allegation appeared to have been entirely fabricated. The palace's institutional response to these complications was to maintain strict neutrality regarding allegations against any political figure. Catherine and William both made clear that the palace would not serve as a vehicle for spreading unsubstantiated allegations about anyone, regardless of their political status or their prominence. The palace's commitment to accountability was based on documented evidence, not on rumor, speculation, or unsubstantiated claims. But the revelations about Trump's name appearing 547 times in the FBI spreadsheet did have significant political consequences. Media outlets seized on the frequency with which his name appeared, using it as the basis for stories about Trump's connections to Epstein and about the various allegations that had circulated about Trump's conduct. In some cases, media outlets carefully distinguished between documented facts and unsubstantiated allegations. In other cases, they did not, creating a public narrative that suggested Trump had been seriously implicated in Epstein's network when the actual evidence was far more ambiguous. The political dimensions of the Trump revelations became increasingly complicated as the months following the document release progressed. Conservative media outlets used the Justice Department's explicit statement that the allegations against Trump were baseless and lacking evidentiary foundation as evidence that the entire document release had been politically motivated. They argued that if the Justice Department had deemed the allegations against Trump to be without merit, then the entire Epstein document release should be viewed with skepticism, as it had apparently been weaponized for political purposes. Liberal media outlets, by contrast, argued that the frequency with which Trump's name appeared in the FBI spreadsheet was itself significant, regardless of whether individual allegations had been substantiated. They argued that where there was this much smoke, there was likely some fire, that the volume of allegations suggested a pattern of behavior worthy of serious scrutiny, even if individual allegations could not be definitively proven. The palace found itself in an extraordinarily difficult position. The institution had committed itself to a principle of accountability based on documented evidence and rigorous investigation. But the palace also understood that the Epstein documents, by their very existence and by the frequency with which various names appeared in them, had already shaped public perception and public narrative in ways that could not be easily controlled or managed. William made the decision that the palace should undertake a comprehensive review of how the Epstein documents were being used and discussed in public discourse, specifically examining the extent to which unsubstantiated allegations were being presented as if they were documented facts. The palace commissioned an external research team to analyze media coverage of the Epstein documents and to assess the accuracy with which allegations were being presented to the public. The research team's findings were troubling. They revealed that in a significant percentage of media coverage of the Epstein documents, unsubstantiated allegations were being presented without adequate qualification or context. Headlines suggested connections and complicity that were not supported by the actual documentary evidence. Allegations from anonymous sources or from conspiracy theory communities were being given credibility simply by virtue of having appeared in the Justice Department's files. This research prompted Catherine to make a significant institutional statement about the palace's commitment to accuracy and to the rigorous investigation of allegations. She stated, "The palace understands that the release of the Epstein documents has created an opportunity for genuine accountability and genuine institutional reform. But the palace also understands that unsubstantiated allegations, when presented without appropriate context and qualification, can do serious harm. They can damage reputations, they can distort public understanding of complex issues, and they can undermine genuine accountability by muddying the distinction between documented wrongdoing and speculation or rumor." Catherine's statement was understood as a rebuke to media outlets and to various commentators who had used the Epstein documents as a basis for making sweeping allegations without distinguishing between documented facts and unsubstantiated claims. It was also understood as the palace attempting to position itself as an institution committed to rigorous standards of evidence and accountability, not to the dissemination of unsubstantiated allegations. But the statement created complications with certain segments of the palace's political base, particularly those who had hoped that the Epstein documents would provide definitive evidence of misconduct by Trump or by other political figures they opposed. By emphasizing the importance of distinguishing between documented evidence and unsubstantiated allegations, the palace was potentially limiting the political utility of the documents for those seeking to damage their political opponents. The palace's position was, however, consistent with its broader commitment to institutional integrity and accountability. The institution had learned, through the Epstein crisis, that its credibility depended on its willingness to adhere to rigorous standards of evidence and investigation, regardless of how convenient it might be politically to accept unsubstantiated allegations or to make sweeping claims about individuals' conduct. The revelation about Trump's name appearing 547 times in the FBI spreadsheet ultimately became a case study in how unsubstantiated allegations, when amplified through media coverage and through social media, could create public narratives that bore only a tangential relationship to documented reality. Trump's actual documented relationship with Epstein, a friendship in the 1980s and 1990s that had apparently ended sometime in the 2000s, was less dramatic and less damaging than the narrative that emerged from the sheer volume of unsubstantiated allegations in the FBI files. But the episode also raised legitimate questions about the culture that had produced such a volume of unsubstantiated allegations in the first place. Why had so many people reported allegations against Trump to the FBI? What had prompted this? Was there something about Trump's public behavior or his documented associations that had generated concern and speculation? Or had Trump simply become a target of conspiracy theories and politically motivated allegations? The Justice Department, in a supplementary statement released several months after the initial document release, attempted to provide some clarification. The statement noted that while most of the allegations against Trump lacked evidentiary foundation, some of the allegations had originated from sources with apparent credibility or with apparent access to relevant information. The statement noted that while these allegations had not been substantiated, they had also not been definitively disproven. The matter remained, in some sense, unresolved. This ambiguity created space for continued speculation and continued media coverage. Conservative outlets cited the Justice Department's note that allegations had not been substantiated. Liberal outlets cited the Justice Department's acknowledgement that some allegations had come from credible sources. Each side used the ambiguity to support its preferred narrative. The palace's response was to maintain its commitment to rigorous standards of evidence while acknowledging that the Epstein documents had inevitably shaped public understanding in ways that could not be fully controlled. Catherine made a final statement on the matter, noting, "The palace has a responsibility to engage with evidence and with truth, not with speculation or with politically convenient narratives. Where the documentary evidence is clear, the palace will acknowledge it. Where allegations are unsubstantiated, the palace will say so, and where matters remain ambiguous, the palace will acknowledge that ambiguity. This commitment to accuracy and to intellectual honesty is fundamental to institutional credibility. William, looking at the broader implications of how the Trump allegations had unfolded, recognized that the palace's experience with the Epstein documents had important lessons for how institutions should approach complex evidentiary questions. He commissioned the development of a comprehensive institutional guide for palace staff regarding how to discuss and evaluate allegations, how to distinguish between documented facts and unsubstantiated claims, and how to communicate about such matters to the public with accuracy and integrity. By late 2026, the immediate controversy about Trump's name appearing in the FBI spreadsheet had begun to fade from daily media coverage. But the episode had left important imprints on how both the palace and the broader public understood the Epstein documents. The documents were valuable as a historical record and as a basis for genuine institutional accountability. But they also served as a cautionary tale about how the volume of allegations, when amplified through media coverage and through social media, could create narratives that bore only a tangential relationship to documented reality. The ultimate resolution of the Trump allegations came not through additional investigations or through new evidence, but through the simple passage of time and the gradual shift in media focus to other matters. By early 2027, more than a year after the Epstein documents had been released, the frequency with which Trump's name appeared in the FBI spreadsheet had become a historical curiosity rather than an active political controversy. What remained clear, however, was that Trump's documented relationship with Epstein, a friendship that had existed in the 1980s and 1990s and that had apparently ended sometime in the 2000s, was real and significant. Trump had been part of Epstein's social network during a period when Epstein was engaging in predatory behavior. Whether Trump had known the full extent of Epstein's activities remained unclear. Whether Trump had been complicit in any way remained unclear. But Trump had unquestionably been associated with Epstein and had moved in similar social circles during a period of documented criminal activity. The palace's handling of this ambiguity became a model for institutional restraint and intellectual honesty. Rather than using the Trump allegations as a basis for making sweeping claims or for advancing a particular political agenda, the palace acknowledged what was documented, distinguished it from what was speculation, and resisted the temptation to weaponize the documents for political purposes. This approach was not universally popular. Critics on both sides of the political spectrum argued that the palace was being too cautious, too unwilling to draw conclusions that seemed obvious given the volume of allegations or given the documented associations. But Catherine and William understood that institutional credibility depended on maintaining rigorous standards of evidence, even when doing so was politically inconvenient or when it disappointed constituencies that had hoped the palace would take a more partisan stance. The broader lesson of the Trump allegation episode was that the Epstein documents, while enormously valuable as a historical record and as a basis for institutional accountability, could also be weaponized for political purposes if institutions were not careful to maintain rigorous standards of evidence and to distinguish between documented facts and unsubstantiated claims. By 2028, the Trump allegations had largely faded from public discourse. But the institutional infrastructure that the palace had developed to manage complex evidentiary questions, the commitment to distinguishing between documented facts and speculation, the commitment to intellectual honesty, even when political expedience might suggest a different course, remained in place and continued to guide institutional decision-making. For the palace, the experience with the Trump allegations reinforced an important lesson that the broader Epstein crisis had taught: that institutional credibility came not from the ability to manage narratives or to weaponize information for institutional purposes, but from the commitment to truth and to rigorous standards of evidence, even when that commitment was inconvenient or when it meant resisting pressure to support particular political agendas. King Charles, in his final institutional reflections on the Epstein crisis, before formally handing governance to William and Catherine, spoke about the importance of maintaining institutional independence from political pressures. He noted that the palace's commitment to accountability and to justice could only be credible if the institution was willing to maintain that commitment regardless of political consequences. He committed the palace to a future in which institutional decisions would be based on evidence and on principle, not on political calculation or on partisan advantage. William and Catherine embraced this commitment and made it central to their vision for the palace's future. They understood that the institution's credibility had been damaged by years of institutional protection and institutional cover-up. The only path to restoring that credibility was through demonstrated commitment to accountability, to transparency, and to truth, even when that commitment came at significant political or institutional cost. The Trump allegation episode, with all its complications and its ambiguities, became a case study in how institutions could maintain their integrity while navigating complex political environments. The palace had resisted pressure to use the Epstein documents to advance a particular political agenda. The palace had maintained rigorous standards of evidence, even when doing so disappointed constituencies that had hoped for more partisan action. And the palace had demonstrated that institutional credibility came not from political savvy, but from commitment to truth. By the end of 2027, more than a year and a half after the Epstein documents had been released and nearly 2 years after the Trump allegations had begun to circulate, the immediate political controversy had passed, but the institutional lessons remained. The palace had learned how to navigate complex evidentiary questions while maintaining institutional integrity. It had demonstrated that commitment to truth could supersede political convenience, and it had shown that genuine institutional strength came not from the ability to manage narratives or to advance political agendas, but from the willingness to acknowledge evidence accurately and to resist the temptation to weaponize information for political purposes. The palace that emerged from this experience was fundamentally different from the palace that had entered into the Epstein crisis. It was an institution that had been forced to confront its own complicity, to acknowledge its failures, and to commit to a different future. It was an institution that had learned to maintain rigorous standards of evidence and accountability. And it was an institution that understood that its credibility depended not on its ability to protect its members or to advance its interests, but on its commitment to truth and to justice.